This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London. All of our podcasts are available from our website, www.sas.ac.uk.
I'll take a few questions, say 3 questions to start with, and then if you can say who you are and who the question is directed at. First question up there. Any more? Okay, start with that first question.
In particular, I wanted to highlight that there was an issue of, rather than dealing with the water supply issues, displacing them in your context. So whether the community near the dam has been involved in a similar dialogue and what the effects have been on that region, whether really, just like, rather if there have been a displacement of problems.
So that's it's a fair question. The answer is it's a complicated answer. It's the affected area where the dam is going to be built is up in the highlands. It's about 4,200 meters right up. The line itself is about 3,500, so it's further up. And there are fewer communities there, but there are communities there. Yes, they can be an integral part of the consultation process. There is, in fact, even a small resettlement which is necessary of, not of houses, but of people from pastoral land of, I think, 8 families in the area where which is going to be flooded. Without going into all the detail about that, that's a process that's been engaged, that is underway, where there are discussions ongoing with them about alternative lands, which actually is going to be quite nearby. So, in short, the answer is yes, but the impact is relatively small. What's been a bigger and more interesting, in a sense, political issue has been the issue about the 2 river basins and how that's played into the politics in Arequipa and the politics in Moquegua, and the impact, or perceived impact, very often downstream, right down to the coast. We saw that river went all the way down to the coast. And water's a crucial issue, but particularly towards the mouth of that river, the River Tambon. I mean, there's so much. They grow rice down. It's a desert, and they grow rice down at the mountain. That mountain. There's so much water that actually comes in during the rainy season there that it makes it viable to grow rice down the bottom. So the whole issue around water quantity is absolutely critical, but plays out further downstream.
Okay, 1, 2, 3.
So it's also a question for you, and it's the adjustments that Anglo made have turned Quellaveco into a much more expensive project than it would otherwise have been. So my question is, what's been the response of other mining companies in Peru to this?
Can I just ask the next question?
One, two, does Anglo American have any other concessions in other parts of Peru? And if so, how many and where? And also what consultations are being carried out? What have been carried out before these concessions? And what are now being carried out in advance of exploitation?
Okay. Richard Harkins. So I had a chance to have a brief talk with you about Quellaveco and the treatment of tailings, which are taken off the map, piped out to a dry place that doesn't in any way threaten another river course. But my question, nevertheless, and he did explain to me there's a degree of recycling of the water from the tailings. Tailings is a wet solution to take waste, very ground waste in mining. Now, there are situations where it's described that the degree of recycling of water might reach something like 30%. And from another way of looking at it, it's nevertheless a tying up of water in the tailings because they don't function otherwise, they're there. And that can be 60-80% of the use of the water in the project. So my question is, therefore the question, the technical, the consideration of the use of a dry tailings method that could be used that helps to, expensive, but helps restore the existing mine area.
Okay. Any other companies? Attitude of other companies to the fact that we were willing to go for a more expensive option? That depends on how you look at it. Because we would probably argue that we've gone for the cheapest viable option. But viable being the crucial word, because viable means something different now. And that's certainly the conversation that we have with our peers, is around what is viable and what it takes to make a project approvable. And viable doesn't mean necessarily viable just because we think it's viable, but it means just because we and the national government thinks it's viable, both vital, but also a lot more people need to think it's viable, and there's a cost attached to that. Well, you know, I suppose underlying the question, there's another point, which is, at what point does it become, I mean, there is a point at which this doesn't happen, because no company is going to invest in a project that, knowingly invest in a project that destroys value for its shareholders. So there comes a point in any mining project where you're going to turn around and say, sorry, we can't do this. And that actually did form part of the conversation at the dialogue table around some of the things we were being asked about. We're saying, well, listen, some things this project can carry and some things it can't. And each project's finances will be a crucial determining factor in terms of what can and can't happen around that project. And that's just a discussion I think is going to become more and more complicated. I mean, it's not universally welcome.
Yeah, that's what I'm presuming. It is setting a bar higher than some people might want to set.
I don't think we've had that. We haven't had a bit, yes. I don't know. Maybe Carlos will offer a view as well, because he probably has far more experience with talking to other mining companies.
I think it has set the bar high. I think the same is happening in the Central Highlands with the Taumocho project run by Chinalco. This is like a good Chinese company, which is surprising for everyone, for those who are following the Chinese operations in Africa. And they have almost, I think, succeeded in a very complex part of a very complicated investment in the Central Highlands, which is displacing the town of Morococha, not a family, 10,000 people, no, altogether. But in doing so, they engage also in a very long-term process of consultations and this and that. And what they say, and the social capital group who helped them out with the social component of the project, is that inhabitants of the town of Morococha, who actually work for other mining companies, Peruvian-owned middle-sized mining companies, were forbidden to go to the workshops because they were learning too much about rights and possibilities and different options. So the other companies were hating what Chinalco was doing because in an indirect way they were empowering these people that would eventually present claims and demands to the other companies. So I would say yes, and that's a very interesting topic, how one company sets the bar higher to make its own project viable, no? Within, of course, the parameters of having a profit. I understand that, no? And in doing so, how it has an impact on the way others behave or not.
This question about Anglo-American's other projects, the answer is we have one other major project, which is the Michiquillay project in Cajamarca, which is which, as it says, Michiquillay and La Encañada areas of Cajamarca. And it's at an earlier stage, late stage exploration, coming up to pre-feasibility. Without going into detail, I'd be happy to chat over lunch a bit more, but just to note one aspect in terms of consultation around that. It was a project that historically had a deal of conflict around it. And the Peruvian government, part of the Peruvian government's response was when it tendered the project, and we won the project in a tender, it was a closed tender, we paid $403 million for the rights to that project. was that the first year, normally what a government says is you've got the right to now get ahead and develop it and get moving so that we can see a revenue stream being generated from this and we can see benefits from the economic activity you bring. But the strange thing, an unusual thing about this was that the first year was to be spent, we had up to a year, purely to negotiate agreements with the local community. And that's what we did, I think about one day before the year was up. We reached an agreement, which I can talk to you in more detail about, if you like. And there have been several other ongoing processes of consultation around different aspects of the, there's a big social fund associated with that project and other aspects of how we interact with the different communities there. The final question about tailings, and I am not a tailings expert, so I'm not an engineer, and so treat this answer with a high degree of caution. But I will try to double check my figures and get back to you. First, I do believe that the current tailings option that we have has an 80% recycling capacity of its water. So yes, you need a lot of water to take tailings down to the tailings impoundment, but you can then take a lot of that water back once the tailings are already there. Have we considered using dry tailings for Quellaveco? I don't know, is the honest answer. I imagine that it would be one of the options that would have been considered earlier on. It is, as you say, more expensive. I don't though have the knowledge to know whether or why it was specifically considered or ruled out.
You take the cost against the cost of the dam, I assume. It would be an economic balancing against. Because if you have a high water use or higher water use, hence the need for the dam. Take that against method of drafting.
Okay, two more quick questions, preferably not aimed at Hugh. Your hand went up very quickly, and okay, you two.
And my question is for Hamlet Martin, because we were interrupted by them. I would be interested, because you already mentioned that one of the difficulties in the implementation of the consultation law in Peru might be the identification of who's going to be consulted. You know, it's going to be difficult to. Can you tell us briefly about other difficulties that they can see in the implementation of the law?
Sorry, and you.
My question is to you. Sorry about that. The first part is why it seems like Anglo American failed to take into account the risk factor that a national election then brought in the planning withdrawal. I just wanted to know why Anglo American sort of seemingly failed to make that risk. And second of all, whether AA is maintaining the dialogue table or something like it now that it has the permit, given that those risk factors have been identified, that in theory the permit could then be withdrawn again at any point before reasons not in control.
And the third question.
And maybe a question then to both speakers. My name is Daan Janssens, I'm from Belgium, policy officer of Katapa, a small NGO. I was wondering if the mining companies are dealing with the question of investing, let's say, in their research and development policy in the use of salted water. You stated clearly that the issue of water is the central issue in most conflicts, and I think it's true. If we know that 50% of the water sources in this region are under concession of mining companies at this moment, then it will be a bigger problem even within 20 or 30 years when the glaciers will have melted down in the central and southern Andes. So I was just wondering, are you investing really in that kind of new technology, trying to use salted water for processing or desalinization of the water for processing?
Okay, quickly everybody, Carlos, your first question.
Consultation processes. The first difficulty is to get the government to reach an internal agreement regarding who will participate in consultation processes. The second one is to develop the capacities to do so. the GIC, the German Cooperation Agency, is working with the Peruvian government with 7 countries trying to develop capacities to run the consultation process. Because it's one thing to have a law and a bylaw, and the other thing is to change the culture of thousands of public officials who have no clue about consultation. They don't even handle the concept. They don't even understand that they have to ask people about the impact of the decision that they are about to make. And that doesn't come about in a couple of days. That's not just a workshop and then you're ready to undergo a consultation process. So I think it's going to be very, very messy in the beginning. And the distance between the law and the capacity of public officials to actually undergo a serious and respectful intercultural consultation process, it's going to be huge. It's going to take a lot of time to bridge that gap. And the second is, what do we do with the people who are not indigenous peoples by any account? The people in Rio Tambo, that they fought against the Via Maria project of Southern, they will not feel into any, they will not find a place in any definition of indigenous peoples. Or before the people in Tambo Grande, in the valleys of Piura, no? But they want to be consulted. So my feeling is that there will be lots of complaints of people feeling that they are left out, and Peru will have to discuss a special legislation to develop consultation right for non-indigenous peoples. And that's also going to be a huge challenge. One word about the consensus, the mesa de diálogo, these consensus building platforms, is that agreements tend to last for a certain period of time. That's a lesson from Quintaya in Cusco. You have an agreement, it lasts for a certain amount of time, and then it breaks down. Because circumstances change, prices change, climate change, people change, no? So it has to be a permanent exercise. It's not that you get it once and that's it, you stay forever. And finally, I wanted to mention that in Peru, desalinization is already also becoming an issue. In the negotiation in Tacna, close to Moquegua, about the expansion of the operations of the Toquepal and Cojone mining projects, the word has been go to the ocean and get yourself some water there, because as opposite to Moquegua, there's no room for a new Pasto Grande in Tacna. There's just no more water available. So, and that's taking the company to the limit, because they are not sure that it's profitable if they have to use marine waters for the process.
Just a quick answer on the consultation as well. Just to note that there's from the dialogue table experience, there are different groups of thoughts going into a dialogue table. You may have people, I developed 3 broad groups, broadly with an interest or interested in the mine going forward, broadly the reverse, and radically ideologically opposed forever. And what was interesting in the dialogue table process, and I think will be very interesting to see how it plays out in the way the consulta previa is actually implemented, is how you create a respectful discussion between people with such radically different points of view. And what happened in the end, in the dialogue table, was that those who were generally, to our great concern, during months and months of dialogue table, broadly opposed to the mine going forward, and those who were radically and ideologically opposed, actually physically came to blows in one of the meetings of the dialogue table, because those who were prepared to talk and engage and understand resented deeply those who were just wanting to stop something to happen, and in their eyes didn't have anything alternative to offer. So it was a very interesting, if slightly worrying, and brief physical exchange. It wasn't just dialogue, but that was the only occasion. Sorry, I'm sorry. Risk factors, your very good question, and as the head of government relations, it was my responsibility. The answer is we did know it was a risk. We were talking to the Umala team, if you like, beforehand, because, to what I was saying before, we don't generally talk to people as much as we should as a mining industry, just to be transparent about what it is that we're up to, what our approach is, what we were doing. But without going into all the politics, what actually happened was that I think the new administration decided it wanted to have a look at the situation and certainly not be seen in its first month as being sort of immensely pro-mining and approving a potentially still then controversial mining project. So that's my personal analysis. You note they didn't actually cancel the permit, they suspended the permit while they then had a look at the situation and allowed the dialogue table to continue along the process. So that's my understanding of what happened. But and then the second half of your question about ongoing risk, there is a monitoring committee which has been set up by the dialogue table. So if you like, it's the sort of a slightly different body, but made up of members from the dialogue table, which is overseeing our compliance with the 21 separate commitments we've made under that dialogue table. That's one part of the way in which we're continuing it, because it's absolutely right that these things erode over time. And the second is through the way we set up our structured engagement with all the different stakeholder groups and community groups. And my final answer is going to be very quick, because I'm afraid I don't know in terms of using salt water, and all I can do is get anecdotal conversations where I've quizzed our engineers about this from curiosity, sort of in a bar late one evening, and they might say, oh no, it's incredibly difficult with salt water, but yes, we're happy to look more and more at desalination. But I'm sorry, but that's the level of specificity I can get, but I can find somebody who knows if you're interested. But maybe there's a knowledge at this end of the table.
Jessica wants to make 2 points as well.
Yeah, just on the issue of desalination, as I understand it, it used to be really sort of the last resort for mining companies to, and this is talking more about northern Chile, to go ahead and get water where there really was none because of aridity and because of huge controversy over buying indigenous rights to water. And I think it's important that in the cases, or at least in some of the cases where it's been proposed in Peru, the idea is not to desalinate and then pump the water up to the mine, it's to desalinate and replace the water that would come down on the coast. So the companies would take the water at source, 3,000-4,000 metres high, and they would replace that water on the coast. And I had a very interesting conversation with an activist in southern Peru, and I was saying, well, is this not just a good solution? They provide their own water, and she thought it was not a very good idea at all, not least because for her that wasn't the same kind of water. It was a very inferior type of water to be replaced with what she considered to be pure Andean water. And the environmental impacts of desalination, both in situ on the coast, and the idea of bringing large quantities of water into the basin, which is the reverse of the hydrological cycle. I think those are also issues that need to be considered.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for all the questions. And I know this is going to be a lot more, so everyone's going for lunch. Lunch is going to be served here.